Hello and welcome to episode 1 of World's Craziest Creatures, a series which speaks to something which I've always been passionate about. It doesn't fall under movies or gaming as I would typically do on my channels, but I think that the Unlimited in HSGU really does cover stuff like this. Stuff which I'm passionate about, which a lot of people have a ton of interest in, which definitely appeals to some of my more horror-related fandoms, and each episode of this series is going to be basically looking at a specific creature. And I'm using the term creature very loosely, everything from a disease, a tiny cell-sized organism, all the way up to a whale-sized predator. And what better way to start off a series like this than with one of the most famous predators in the world, the great white shark. Now, on a personal note, sharks in general, alongside spiders, are one of my two favourite overarching classifications of animal, if you will. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always super interested in them, and although spiders were my number one, sharks were just so cool to me, and the great white is certainly the most famous of the predatory sharks. Some other sharks are a lot cooler than people think, and also a lot more similar in size to the great white than many people would think. Now, speaking of that size, there's technically no point in calling it the great white shark, because scientifically speaking, there is no lesser white shark. So most scientists will tend to call it just the white shark, because people still know what you're talking about. Now, this is a massive creature, and there are tons upon tons of misconceptions about them. And of course, a lot of that is due to pop culture, Peter Benchley, the Jaws movie, a variety of other movies as well. It's the go-to shark when you think about quote-unquote man-eaters. But the interesting thing is, great whites, although yes, they are the highest documented shark in terms of biting humans, they actually don't necessarily like to eat humans. And that's something which a lot of people don't realise. In fact, within one bite, a great white can typically tell that a human is such, and that they don't want to eat you, which is typically why most people who do die from being attacked by a great white are actually not eaten alive. Some are, but most bleed out from that initial bite, because humans are not a great meal for a great white. They like oily, fatty, very rich foods, whereas a human, even a more portly human, you're still a lot of bone structure, and the shark doesn't need that. In fact, its digestion is not even suited to that. And that also ties into the very, very strong misconception that great whites assume that, for instance, a human laying on a surfboard silhouetted against the sky is some form of large turtle, which it wants to eat. That's also wrong. They actually can tell the difference between a human and a turtle, it's just that they can't see properly either way on those occasions. They don't think you're a turtle, they just think you're something that's edible. And as I said, within one bite, they can usually tell, actually, you're not, and the surfboard certainly isn't. Now, one of the most amazing and certainly one of the most legendary things about the great white is the size and weight that these creatures can be. They are massive sharks and massive predators in general. Interestingly, they actually fall into the very broad category in nature of sexual dimorphism, which means that the female is significantly larger than the male. Now, the average male can be up to about 4 meters long, which is still a hefty 13 feet. The average female can be up to about 5 meters long, so significantly bigger. However, on 2 occasions, one in 1987 and another in 1988, 2 professionally verified white sharks, females once again, were verified at 6 meters long. In fact, one of them was 6 meters and the other was 6.1. That's around a 20-foot eating machine. They, of course, don't sleep, they don't stop moving, which is common for sharks, and essentially what you're talking about, after considering these specs, if you will, is a Cadillac-sized eating machine. It's an incredible creature. And imagine finding yourself in the water with something like that. Regardless of if it's going to attack you, what an awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying sight that would be. Now, one of the most famous images of a white shark is, of course, when it's breaching. When its head is out of the water, eyes rolled back, jaw set forward out of its skull, if you will, to attack its prey. Typically a seal, for instance, that is grabbing from underneath the water. They can completely breach above the water level, like some whales and dolphins sometimes do, to the point of even jumping into boats sometimes. Incidentally, the reason why they're believed to attack boats is something which you might not know about, and that is that they share in common with hammerheads, amongst other things, and that is that great whites actually detect electrical impulses. And in fact, they can detect it down to a 0.5 billionth of a volt. What that means for a great white is that they can detect the heartbeat of even tiny sea creatures. And that's where boats come in. These large boats with a number of electronic devices on them, it's believed can interfere with a white shark's senses and possibly annoy them. It would certainly make sense why they would try to attack something that's messing up its feeding. Now, to continue talking about the size and weight and specs, if you will, of a white shark, they can have around 300 teeth, and the teeth tend to be what you're looking at most of the time, either in photos or if you actually do meet one. And the weight is also massive. Now, as I already said, they can be up to 20 feet long in the case of those large females, not so much in terms of an average male or female, but even the weight can be massive. And the speed that these sharks can hit is all the more impressive when you think about how heavy they are. Now, in terms of weight, these females can be up to about 2.3 tons, 5,000 pounds. So when I said it was a Cadillac-sized eating machine, I wasn't joking. 20 feet long, 2.3 tons, 300 teeth, never sleeps, and can jump so high out of the water that it can go into a boat and even knock people in the boat out of the boat, which has happened in the past as well. But to jump briefly back to that speed which I mentioned, in a similar way to here in the UK, a form of spider called the wolf spider, a very large, hairy, by UK standards at least, spider, they can run real fast but for a very short amount of time, because they're very heavy by spider standards and it takes a lot of effort for them to do that. In a similar way, the white shark can actually sprint, if you will, in swimming terms at least, up to about 35 miles an hour. Close to 60 kilometers an hour. That's pretty daunting as well when you add it onto the existing mammoth spec that they have across the weight and size and teeth, etc. But it's not just about speed. White sharks can swim real deep as well, and they travel tens of thousands of miles every year using predominantly their fat and oil reserves to keep them going on those longer trips, which of course ties into what I said earlier on about humans not really being an ideal meal. Not unless you're for instance, 450-pound sumo wrestler, at least. Now, as many of you will doubtless know, apart from humans, there's only one other predator which poses a threat to the white shark, and it is, of course, the orca. The orca is larger, at least, than most white sharks. Some of those massive females can actually be similar, but generally speaking, an orca is larger, and the significant advantage of intelligence that they have also means that they don't necessarily even attack in the same way. Orcas, for instance, have been known to hold a great white upside down and keep it stationary so that it, in effect, asphyxiates, or the human equivalent of that. They then eat its liver and carry on their merry way. The interesting thing is, though, and this is another little tidbit that many people have heard of before, on a couple of occasions when white sharks have been attacked by orcas in that way, certain other white sharks in the area, even a significant perimeter from the area, tracked sharks in particular, have been noted to immediately dive deep down, and white sharks have been seen and tracked at diving up to 4,000 feet below the surface. So they're not just surface dwellers by any stretch, they really are an all-round eating machine. But not without its predators. Now, when you consider the threat that orcas can pose to white sharks, you will probably fall into the very understandable line of thinking that some of it might be to do with the fact that the white shark is often thought of being a lone predator, whereas the orca a team player. That's technically not true, because although white sharks are often seen alone, they're actually seen together sometimes. In fact, on repeating occasions in the same places. Now, they do have a pecking order. Sometimes they will apparently bite each other, or so it would seem from some of the injuries that they've sustained that do match a white shark bite, and they seem to base their pecking order on stuff like age, which shark was in a particular area first, and, of course, size. Now, another fascinating thing about the white shark is actually to do with its immune system, because a number of creatures, including humans, of course, have certain very detrimental effects when we come in contact with heavy metals, in a water supply, for instance. White sharks seem to be, for the most part, immune to this. They don't have the same age-related wear and tear, or even the same red blood cell production due to heavy metals being in the waters that they're in, as you would expect, which is again a pretty fascinating little facet of what makes the white shark so impressive. It's not just an eating machine, which is what everybody knows, it's so much more than that. Now, incidentally, the white shark is listed as a vulnerable creature. They are hunted, and something which I didn't know about them before researching it is that apparently no aquariums in the world should have one. Now, I'm sure there are one or two private collections which do, but they're not supposed to, because with their migratory instinct, it just doesn't really work, so it would be inhumane to do so. I'm sure SeaWorld has tried it, because SeaWorld. Another fascinating thing about the white shark is the way it reproduces. They actually don't reach sexual maturity for a long time, and they can live for up to around 70 years, which again is probably a lot more than you might think. The males reach sexual maturity a little bit quicker, around 25, 26 years, and the females over 30, sometimes around 33 years. And although white sharks do have live young, around 4 feet long in fact, they interestingly don't have a placental connection to their offspring. The interesting thing is, another thing which you might not know, is the mother actually continues producing unfertilized eggs for that young shark to eat before it's even born. Ultimately, the white shark, commonly called the great white shark, is a fascinating animal. It has a number of, you could say, abilities in a general, almost comic book-esque sense, which make it pretty fascinating. There's a lot more to it than just a mouth, but that tends to be what many people, understandably because of movies and books, think of it as, and even if you look at the creature and don't do any research on it, you could be forgiven for coming to that conclusion. It does look like just an eating machine, and although that is much of what it does, how it does it, and how the rest of its body and its immune system and its reproductive cycle and its travel habits are concerned, there's a lot more to it than just that, and I think it's a pretty awesome animal. But that's it for episode 1 of World's Craziest Creatures, and of course feel free to join in on the discussion down below. Tell me your thoughts. Are you a fan of sharks, the white shark, maybe others too? If you have suggestions, of course, for this series as well, I'm always open to those. And apart from that, just give me your thoughts on the series. And until next time, I'll see you then, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.